So thank you very much for joining for today's session. I will be talking about TypedData, which is, I guess, very important and low-level API in Drupal, but also in the same time, it's, I would say, very well undocumented one. So hopefully today after this session, you will finally understand it. So yes. Let's start. Come on. Take your seat. Feel comfortable. Remember, of course, about our contribution opportunities. So feel free to join. I will start with few words about me. So I'm Piotr Pakulski. I'm from Poland. Currently, I'm working as a Drupal developer at Box, which is great. You may ask me what the Box is. So Box is single source collaboration platform built for managing the entire content lifecycle. Cool. We are proud to call 97,000 companies and 68% of Fortune 500 our customers. So it's a pretty big scale, but you may ask me, that's cool, but what you are doing there with Drupal? What are your responsibilities? So I'm simply leveraging all the goals and everything that the marketing team is trying to achieve via Drupal-powered websites. So I'm helping them with internal and external Box sites. So I work with PHP for pretty long time. It's at least 17 years right now. I started working with Drupal 7, late version of Drupal 7, so I was a little bit late on the party comparing to other contributors and speakers today in this event. So I used to be a Symfony developer before switching to Drupal, so for me it was a very interesting transition. Just because the team was asking me questions about some Symfony components as they were planned to be part of Drupal 8, and I was asking them about some Drupalisms. So it was very interesting transition. You can of course find me on some socials like LinkedIn and Drupal.org, of course. I also have my YouTube channel where I'm posting some my hobby videos, which are related mainly to fixing some old cars, tuning them, and so on. I guess I also want to say big thank you for the whole DrupalCon Barcelona team. Thank you for having me here. It's a real honor and pleasure to be able to speak to you today. So let's have a quick recap and look what is in the agenda for today's presentation. So first of all, we will start with answering important question, why there was a need to have some low-level API in Drupal. What are the reasons coming straight from PHP limitations? Then we'll quickly look into the history and what was wrong with Drupal 7, what were the problems back the day. Then I will quickly go through the process of implementing this API on Drupal.org. I will show how the work was looking like, where it's called TypedData, not the other name. Then I will finally show you what are the main three components in this API. And this is the knowledge I would like you to focus on and to leave this room with at least this knowledge that we have these three main components, which I will be talking about soon. And then finally, I will show you how everything in terms of content entities are built on top of this API. And where you are working with this API and how you can use it with some use cases. And hopefully after around 30 to 40 minutes, we should have few additional minutes for some questions. Cool. Let's start. One more thing. I will go in a very with some very basic stuff in the beginning, and I will be quickly climbing up in terms of complexity, so don't be disappointed in the very beginning of this session. So let's start with some basics. How good you know PHP? I have a very important question for the audience, and I'm looking for some numbers thrown into me. So how many variable built-in types PHP currently has? What do you think? Let's go. We have bool, we have string, and so on. Everything we have in PHP. I'm listening for any answers. Throw some numbers. Just 5, 15, 10. All right. I was always thinking that we have 7, but according to the latest documentation, we have 9. So, isn't it remarkable that even though we have so many good developers and so many experienced developers here, we do not know exactly what are the built-in types in PHP? Isn't it remarkable? So this might be the first reason why some low-level API to represent data in Drupal was needed. All right, so what do we have? We have null, bool, integer, float, string, array, object. These are the 7 that I was aware of. And additionally, we have callable and resource. You may ask me what the callable is. So callable is, it might be a simple function or a method in a class, and then it's get to be a callable in terms of the variable built-in types in PHP. And resource, it's something that it's external from PHP. So FTP, for example, is a external resource. All right, so we agree about how many built-in types we have in PHP, and let's go with another very important information that everyone knows, that PHP is a dynamically typed language. And this table is a very good example with a loose comparison between some simple values. As you can see, it's completely, I would say, random, and you can expect different results if you are comparing the same things like 0 and 0, depending what is the representation. Of course, everyone is aware of this, but this table is perfectly showing us why we shouldn't use the loose comparison. And looking into the strict comparison, this table looks way more stable, but still it's not exactly what we might expect every time. So, in the light of the PHP limitations, why we need type data? Let's put it together. We cannot rely on the certain type of a data. We cannot be always sure what will be the exact type that is coming to us from external API or from external class, for example. So this might be problematic. Not always we can be sure that 1 is 1 in the strict comparison. So either oftentimes we use this loose comparison, which is not good in the end of the day. And now, next exercise for the audience. Anyone who knows what's the difference between these two integers? I'm not, I'm asking about more high level difference, not just about the number. Anyone? Okay, I will make it a little bit easier. So it's very straightforward. The first one is timestamp, and the second one is just a random integer. And we do not have any possibility in PHP to add this additional metadata to it to let us know that this is indeed a timestamp, isn't it? All right. So, however, in some cases, it's useful to be able to define some kind of a abstract type. All right. So we wrapped up all the reasons coming straight from PHP limitations. Let's have a look on the Drupal 7 history. As you probably know very well, back the day in Drupal 7, we had this giant associative arrays, which were representing everything. And because of that, there were a lot of limitations and problems. There was no consistent way of defining data type. So again, the example with timestamp, there was not an easy way to recognize semi-automatically that this is some kind of a metadata, that it's timestamp, and so on. It was very difficult to say, and it was possible but tricky to say if field is translatable or not. Going further, the access levels were hard to define because of these giant tables. and data stored in them. And lastly, the famous hook field validate from Drupal 7, which was totally decoupled from field API and form API, which was not good. And everyone remembers probably that these giant hooks were, our way to validate some forms. And lastly, it was very hard to build machine-readable API back the day. In Drupal 7, you can have a look in the REST module in Drupal 7, how difficult and tricky it was to traverse throughout these giant structures of associative arrays in 7. So, of course, community was aware of these problems, and they decide to create this Drupal org thread and to implement the API to unify entity properties and fields. It was more about refactoring the field API and decoupling the field API. So they were thinking that, all right, we need something to store this additional metadata, and maybe we should call it the new API metadata API, or maybe property API. So during the process, they've decided that not property, not metadata, not data API, let's call it TypedData. That is why the name is what it is right now. So probably this Drupal.org post is the answer for the naming. Let's go further with the history. Of course, on Drupal.org, there was a very important question: why another API? Isn't it an overkill to implement a new low-level API just for the sake of describing the entity properties? But the community was able to provide bunch of places that will be beneficent from this API, including things like entity property API, blocks, layouts, rules, action APIs, tokens, CMI, metadata, semantic mappings, and even template variables. So it was pretty clear that we want to go with building some abstract representation for our data. All right, so they've defined what should this API look like. So it will be a data model that will consist of data lists, complex data, and data primitives. But what's very important here is that all the representations should be easily mapped to the built-in primitives, which are predefined. What it means, and what was the goal of it? The goal was to resolve this problem of the machine-readable way for representing the data and to easily transfer it from one representation to another. Good example, moving an object to JSON representation, for example, to make the REST module maintainers' lives easier. So they've prepared this table with the basic types that we may expect from our API. I guess right now it's a little bit more, which I will show you in the very end of the presentation. I want you to pay attention on going from, I hate this microphone, by the way. Take your attention going from left to right. So on the very left, you have the naming, the type that will be in our API. And on the right, how it's going to cast to some primitive values. For example, the duration can be casted to date interval, and then it can be easily casted to integer or anything else that can represent it. That is why it will be easy to be machine readable. Cool. So the next main component was that we should be able to represent as many complexity levels in our abstract representation as we would like to. This is a very simple example of a JSON representation, and as you can see, we have at least 2 levels of complexity. The deepest level, complex data number 2, is storing some primitive representations. All right, so finally, community decided that we need another Drupal org thread to just build this API. And actually, the title of this Drupal org issue is answering all our questions for today's session. So TypedData API for allowing metadata to be associated with data. Cool. isn't it? So as you can see, it's closed and fixed, which is good, and it was introduced in Drupal 8. So finally in Drupal 8, we've welcomed the TypedData API, and now, as you can see, we have this example of entity. On the right, it's the Drupal 7 giant associative arrays, and now in Drupal 8, you have this beautiful representation, abstract representation going from the top. You have the entity, then the entity, as you may expect, may have some properties, then the property can have some items, and finally in the very bottom you have some values, which is cool. All right, so we are done with the reasoning and with the history. So then you may ask me, where should I go if I would like to know more about this API? Of course, besides joining this session today, you can go to Drupal.org, where you are going to find a few bullet points which are completely valid, like overview, plugins, definitions, and so on. So these are the main components. You will find some modest description and some stream of class names, interfaces names, and so on. At least for me, this is it was very hard to consume, and I was not sure if I understand what the API really is doing. So I found another very helpful thing on Drupal.org, which is this diagram. I was revisiting this guy for many times, and I still not sure if I understand it. And don't worry, I'm not going to use it on today's session. So I'm just calling it a chicken diagram because it's very similar to chicken. This is, yeah. So if not Drupal.org, what else you can do? Of course, you can go with the Daniel Sipos book, which is a great book. And in my case, it was, when I was preparing for this session, it was Drupal 8 module development. I guess that every Drupal developer in some point of his career should read this book. But be alerted during the process if you are not, losing your friends or your family is not starting to hate you, because it's pretty, at least for me, hard to consume and digest. So, going further, what you will find inside is the author was kind enough to provide us 7 from nearly 600 pages book dedicated to this low-level, very important API, on top of which everything is built. And you will find, again, a stream of class names, interfaces names, properties, and so on, but also some very good examples, but no diagrams, no nothing. So even the author on the very end of the section is saying that, I know this was a very difficult section to follow. Just don't worry, I want you to know that we have this API. Feel free to get back to it whenever you are ready. So I want to fill this gap today for you. So I've digested all the information I was able to find in this book and in internet, and provide it to you in as simple as possible way today. Cool. So answering the question according to this book. So what is the type data? First of all, as we know, it should wrap the values of any kind of complexity. And secondly, it should give meaning to the data it wraps. A good example may be a license plate. In this case, it's Spanish one. So we have at least 4 pieces of information here, which is the flag of Europe, country, identifier, the number, and some string, let's say. And without this wrapper, it will be just a random piece of data. But with this wrapper, we know that this is indeed a license plate, so it has this additional metadata meaning. So exactly this is what the type data is doing in Drupal. Right now I'm going to take a little turn into cooking examples and some nutrition fact stickers. So next example may be exactly this nutrition fact sticker. So you have some ingredients, and without the knowledge that this is a nutrition fact sticker, it will be just a random piece of data. So we can imagine we have the structure, and the structure can have different values, different instance, different values, different instance. This is how we are building instances in Drupal. Cool. Finally, I guess we are ready to see what are the moving parts, what's under the hood of our API. So as I said on the very beginning, we have three main components. It's I will stick with cooking examples. So we may have some ingredients. There you go. Glass of milk, a little bit of butter, and so on and so on. So you can imagine we have some ingredients, and in our API, they are called just plugins. What's important here is that you can imagine that these plugins can be more and more complex. These are, let's call, primitives, like string, integer, and so on. These are very basics. Anyone has any idea what this might be? List. We have ingredients, so this is recipe, exactly. So we have recipe, very good. You know, the second component of TypedData. There you go. In TypedData, it's just a definition, so it's a recipe. We have ingredients and recipe. So who else is needed to make the recipe work for us and to get some results? Who is needed in the kitchen in good restaurant? Yes, chef. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly in English, but yes, we need this person. And in our API, it's simply called the manager. So we have ingredients, recipe, and manager. What's important here on this recipe, at this point, we do not have any values. We have just the information about the ingredients, but we do not know how much milk we will need, how many eggs, and so on. This knowledge is going to inject our chief, because he knows how much of it it's needed. So when the chief and manager is doing its job, as a result, we may expect some beautiful instance of a cake, which in our case in Drupal might be, for example, an instance of entity. Cool. And this is not the end, because as I've said in the very beginning, this API should allow us to build more and more and more complex structure without limitations. So we can imagine this cake can be just another ingredient for a recipe for a good dinner. If you had a good dinner, people may get to know each other. And then things may start to be really complicated, and as a result, we may end up with marriage, which oftentimes it's I guess, I know, really complicated structure oftentimes. All right, and this is how we move from simple egg in our API to really complex stuff. Okay, it's time for a code example. Because it's an IT industry, I just want to be sure that we are on the same page. So everyone knows what the fried egg is. I mean, sunny side up. I can see that you have some experience in cooking. That's good, but let's be totally sure we are talking what we are talking about. So this is the result we are targeting today, and we are going to use our API to prepare this sunny side up fried egg. So what we will need, of course, some very primitive ingredients, like in Drupal language it will be just a string. It will be the egg, of course, salt, pepper, and butter. Each of it is small ingredient that can have a label and already is on some abstract representation. So then, if we have these ingredients, we will need a recipe, very tricky recipe. And because we are using TypedData, we are using map data definition, and we are setting some properties like egg, salt, pepper, and butter. And as you remember, at this point, we have absolutely no values. We have just the recipe without any values. And you may ask me also what the map data definition is. It's simply a representation of the giant associative arrays from Drupal 7. So this is what map is doing. That is why oftentimes you are going to see it when, for example, X debugging some data representations. Cool. So we have recipe, we have ingredients, we need the manager. There you go, TypedData manager. And as you can see, just one-liner. The manager is injecting the values that we need only one egg for now, a little bit of salt, and a little bit of pepper, and so on. And as a result, we are going to get the fried egg sunny side up instance. which is the abstract representation of what we have just planned. What we can do with it, we can get the definition, we can get the label, and what's important, we can go one level down to get the ingredient and get the label for it, and so on and so forth. So you can already, even on this very simple example, see how easy it is to traverse up and down throughout the structure. So it should be way more easier to be machine readable. Cool. Because we are heading up to more complex things right now, I'm introducing these icons for you. Sorry for not having some cool stuff here, but I'm just a simple backend developer. I'm not a UX designer. Yeah, so this egg with design dinosaur will be a simple ingredient, of course the recipe and the chief. So how our fried egg representation will look like then? We can have some ingredients like salt, butter, and so on. The recipe for the fried egg, so the definition, and then comes the manager. This is the definition, and then comes the manager and is injecting the values that we need: 1 egg, a little bit of salt, and so on. And as a result, we have our fried egg. And as I said, we can build more complex structure with it. So for example, we can build breakfast. There we go. We have fried egg, a little bit of bread, and I don't know, something more, which you are usually eating for the breakfast. So we have more complex structure. And then again, it may get more and more and more complex. And as a result, it may end up with something very, very complex. But this is not the end, of course. We can get more and more and more complex stuff here. And as a result, we may decide that we want to occupy Mars and to be multiplanetary species. So this is how in TypedData you are going from the simple string to entity. All right. Cool. Let me have a bit of water before starting with that. Entities, finally. I promise you that we'll get to the bottom of it. So be prepared for something very, very complex. There you go. So the first turtle is our TypedData API in Drupal. Then comes the second one, for example, Field API. And somehow Dung is on top. Then comes the entities and even more and more complex structures. Just don't ask, piled up. So this is how things are working in Drupal, and this is why TypedData is very important API, and it's good to know that at least it exists. So because all of the things in Drupal are built on top of it. So oftentimes, when you are debugging some data structures, you may have this feeling that things are looking like that in Drupal, isn't it? Cool. All right. Right now I'm climbing into the top of my UX designing skills. I have prepared a very cool structure for you, explaining what is in the entity. So in entity, we have two types of fields, the base fields and configurable fields, as you probably know very well. Let's go with the base fields. All right. So as you expect, we have some recipe for them, which is base field definition. So this is simple, in simple words, and recipe for the base fields. And then it may sometimes be a base field override. Why? Because whenever you are changing anything in the base fields, it needs to be an exportable field to have it in the configuration. So that is why sometimes it might be a base field override. So then comes the manager injecting some values, and as a result, we have field item list, which is another level of complexity, pretty complex ingredient for something more. All right, so we have base fields. Now configurable fields. You may expect that we will have some definition, but it is not so simple in Drupal. Of course, we have field config, but this guy, field config configuration, implements data definition interface. What it means? It's simply, it's still just the recipe, but it's placed two roles here. So besides being the definition, it's also needs to be a configuration because we want to export our custom fields. All right. So then we can wrap them together I want to pay your attention to all the namings with the blue color. So as a result, we may have a recipe for entity data definition, which extends complex data definition base, which comes straight from our API. Cool. So we have the recipe for entities. So then comes the manager injecting some values. And as a result, finally, we have entity adapter. Probably you've heard this name or seen it oftentimes, which extends straight from TypedData. And what it is, it's simply data type plugin that defines entity data type. And again, this whole structure is another ingredient that can be used for something more complex. So we are building up and up the complexity. All right, so we've just managed to go through the entities, but I promise you to, again, go to the bottom of it. So let's see how the things are how the complexity of things looks like in the one level down. So let's have a look in the base fields, for example. By the way, going back. This diagram is a perfect example why backend developer should never be a UX designer. Yeah, so base fields. You may expect some recipe for the field item. So we have the field item data definition. And when the manager is injecting some values, we may expect some result in terms of another ingredient. And this ingredient depends on the type of the field. For my example, it's a simple string item because it was a string field. And the string item extends string item base, and then it extends map plugin. Probably remember this map because it's nice smooth transition from the associative arrays from 7. So again, this is the foundation coming straight from TypedData. So even though we are right now in the one level down, you can see easily that we are using TypedData. And again, we have more and more of these fields, and then we have a recipe for base field definition that extends list data definition, again coming straight from TypedData. And then when fill up with values, we have field item list that extends item list. So the naming is pretty complicated, but pay attention on the blue namings. They are coming straight from TypedData. So we can see why this image with turtles were pretty accurate, because everything is piling up on top of our TypedData API. Cool. I guess right now you are at least aware that we have this in Drupal. So I promise you that we will go quickly through the available. These are the ingredients that are coming from Drupal core. These ingredients may be used to build some recipes for some complex data structures. So what we have is something like any binary, boolean, datetime, decimal, which I will be talking about in a minute. Duration, email, float, integer, item list, you remember it from the previous slide with entities. Language, problems with the languages in Drupal 7, language reference, map, the most common one, string data, times span, timestamp, and URI. Cool. I was curious what the N is, but the N is simply covering everything that it's not possible to cover by the other types. Cool. I've checked if the N is used anywhere, and indeed it's used in core, in the date time item. As you can see in the red square, we have the data definition that is using the type of any. Going back to the decimal type. So after presenting this session in Polish Drupal Camp in last year, one of the Polish contributors asked me a very important question: if I am aware of this Drupal org issue, because it's hanging for a little bit of time, starting from 2017, and it's about the decimal item should not use string as its data definition. So we have a short conversation, and the decision was quickly made that yes, this is very simple to just fix. And the grabber pushed the needed code and some tests, and yes, finally it's in the core. So I'm pretty proud that I have this small brick after this session, and that was added to the core. All right. So let's go with some use cases. I must speed up a little bit. If you would like to see some good examples with primitives and a little bit more complex structures, you can go to Matt Galaman. You probably know this guy. Repository in GitHub. You will find there good examples of primitives and maps. So we can go, and these are some primitive example like an email and how to add constraints and so on, how to build the structure and how different it is comparing to Drupal 7. And then a little bit more complex, of course, map data definition, because map is the most favorite one. And then the next good example, probably the most often used scenario where you can use directly our TypedData API is to when you are consuming some external APIs like JSON and so on. So you can visit this 5jars blog and the TypedData API in Drupal 8. As you probably remember from the beginning of this presentation, this is a simple JSON string, and the goal is to build a structure using our API. So then, when we would like to consume this JSON, it will be just a one line. All right. So what we'll need? We'll need 2 levels of complexity. So going pretty fast. We'll need 2 types of custom ingredients and 2 types of custom recipes. So let's go with the recipes. The first one will cover, we cover the complexity level number 1, which will consist status command and results. And the results are built on, it's a list data definition that it's built on custom type, which will be demo results, which will be created in a little bit of time. Okay, so we have the first recipe. The second recipe is for the second level. Here we will store the primitive data from this JSON, like title, body, and author. So we have recipes. Now we need the simple custom ingredients, which are simply no-brainers. Response data that extends map, our favorite one, and results data that will extend, of course, our favorite map. So we have ingredients, we have recipe. So right now the chief is going to do the magic. So on the very top we have the type data manager, which is our chief, and then converting JSON to array. So we have the JSON array, and as I promised you, it's just one liner to consume it. And at this point, all the data from the JSON string is in our representation. So you can do whatever you want to do with it. Traverse up and down, get some values, get labels, definitions, and so on and so forth. So this is how probably you can use it in your everyday life. But hopefully after this session you will stay with these 3 icons I prepared for you to help you remember that we have these 3 ingredients. Components, ingredients, recipes, and the chief, which is injecting the values into it and preparing some complex structures. Don't worry about occupying Mars, at least for now. All right, so thank you very much. Hopefully this was helpful for you, and I am listening for questions, and feel free to vote for the session and fill up the survey. Listening for the questions. Thank you. That was expected. Okay, we have 2 questions.
So I remember from debugging these entities that we have a values property, and we have like some property that represents the definition of the data, I think. But I don't remember if you dive into the value property, do you find more sub definitions, or do you just find the raw data array? I don't remember that. Do you find? I think you do find the field item objects or something.
Yeah, if you have enough time, you can traverse down to the very bottom where you will find some string, integers, and so on. Unless you are not, traversing sidewise, like in some relational fields, and then it's going to be an endless loop, limbo. But it is possible to get from entity to the very bottom pretty easily, but sometimes it may be tricky.
And if I have two like nodes and they both have the same type, then I would find the same data definition. Is this actually the same object, or is it like the two instances?
There are two different instances. Everything depends what are the values that were injected by the manager. Manager is creating instances, and it's grabbing values, injecting into the recipe, and then we have an instance.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
So we can have the same type with different instances.
So that data definition instances are separate instances, or just the node? Of course, a node is different, of course. But
I'm not sure if I understand correctly your way of thinking.
It's just like how objects are in PHP. It's just you have properties, and they reference other objects, and this could be two. They could be the same that is being referenced because the type should be the same, or it could be like new instance of the same type created every time. But I just don't remember how it is.
I would say let's move this discussion after the session because I'm not sure if I understand. We have another question. Thank you.
How much of this API would we need if Drupal were written in a strictly typed language?
This is a good question. Probably we'll still need it, depending on the language possibilities and limitations. It was just a basic example. What are the limitations we are facing with in PHP? So I guess we'll still need some abstract representation because we want to have unlimited way to build more and more complex data structures in Drupal, isn't it?
I mean, we've got this concept of aggregation, which already exists in, I don't know, C, PO, object-oriented languages, and so on. So why do we need this?
I don't know. I'm a PHP developer. I'm not sure about, as you said, C and other languages. But I'm pretty confident that each language, depending on the use case, may require some abstract representations for more complex data that will have a lot of metadata inside of it, I guess. I
mean, I would imagine that the low-level objects, you could rewrite them as the value objects without this metadata, where the metadata is already part of the type. But I guess if you go to nodes and fields, then there's so much dynamic stuff happening that you would need maybe generics or something to be able to have a separate class for each thing automatically. So you would have to dynamically create these value classes and so on.
Yeah, going also back, thank you for the insights. To your question, it's very hard to imagine for me to represent, for example, these configurable fields in some very built-in type in some language, because we have, field config, in the same time implementing the definition because it plays to roles, so it's very custom.
That's a shame because we have to prepare for the next DrupalCon when Dries will announce Drupal is going to be rewritten in Haskell.
Okay, all right, cool. That's good info. Thank you.
I wanted to ask: is there any way that the manager in this diagram would warn you about if any recursion appears? In the case of the marriage example, if you suddenly become your own grandpa time travel, kind of thing.
I'm getting your idea. I guess if you prepare the structure, the definition is well prepared, and the structure and the types and the ingredients are well prepared, there shouldn't be a case to recursion problem or something like this, I guess. At least in my experience, I didn't hit this problem, but if, I guess it's not going to tell you anything, just some bad error shown on the screen.
All right, thanks.
Anyone? Oh, okay. Sorry for the walk, but it's good for your health. I'm struggling with the microphone, so
this solution, no, you can hear me. The solution is for it's really good just for PHP in itself. Obviously, it's been built for Drupal, but associative arrays are something which are in PHP across the board. So as in the issue threads that you found as you were looking through this, is anyone else like in the Symfony or Laravel community interested in taking the work that's been done here and then using it in, because it's relevant across the board, surely?
Yeah, it's
Like
relevant
associative
across the
array,
board,
which-
I guess. I don't know how about the Symfony guys. Do they have their own solution for that problem?
I don't.
It's a good question.
Yeah,
I
'cause
can
P-
check
P-
and
the associative array thing is a PHP.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
common problem, I guess.
Yeah.
So knowing the Symfony guys, probably they have something, but if they have, probably Drupal will just
You can take
treat
it
it as
out.
a dependency
Yeah.
and use it. So
Yeah.
because we have this low-level API, I'm guessing that they do not have anything that is good enough for Drupal. Thank you for the question. It's very relevant. Right. We are just on time. Thank you very much.